Welcome, fellow travelers. I'm Kat, and I'm joining Chibi and Virtek at the Golden Feather. Come on in, grab a seat, and let's share tales of adventure.
You were talking earlier about there being 64 classes. So the question I have for you then is 64 classes still a good idea? And this is coming from Ricard E, who says, after seeing the Ranger update, I'm very confident in Intrepid Studios being able to make some great classes. However, I'm starting to doubt the 64 class model. I'd rather have around 10 to 12 well-designed and unique classes that are also well-balanced. 64 different classes could be cool, but it will take a lot of work, time, and money to make all those classes feel unique, have depth in its gameplay, and be a viable option for PvP or PvE. Yes, the biggest hurdle is to create a good base archetype, but making the second archetype feel important and impactful will still be a huge hurdle and a big time investment. And before you give your thoughts on it, I also wanted to highlight what Nick says. He says there is only 8 classes. Don't believe the augments will drastically change the abilities until you see it happen on at least a single archetype. Ashes is a game with 8 classes and parties of 8 people, so it's a perfect fit. What are your thoughts?
I guess leaning on the conservative side of like, we know there's going to be 8 classes, so let's stick with what we know for now until we see how the augments actually work. Is 64 classes too much? I'm going to say no because I've seen it done in Arcade, and it's not something we have not yet seen in the MMO space. Is Arcade a perfect example of a balanced class system? Of course not, because when you have 64 variations of things, inevitably some are just outright better than others. But from what I recall from Arcade, and I'm just going to say that I only played Arcade when it actually released in the West, which was like, I don't know, like 6-8 years. I don't even remember. It was a long time ago. I was still in college. And you could cherry pick the skills that you wanted to use from some of the other classes and truly have a hybrid build that you could put together. And some were just better than others by a long shot. And I think the way Ashes can improve on that class design system from what Arcade did, if they go all in on augments being the cornerstone feature of the class design itself. The reason I am really nervous about augments is entirely based around the fact that Cleric is the only healing class in the entire roster. And we've seen across other MMOs that there are many different ways to heal in a game, and some styles are better in certain situations than others. Sometimes a Holy Paladin is just better in certain situations than a Resto Druid. And we also have a lot of people who are going to be playing this game that if they want to play a healer, they only have one option. And if they only have one option, then those augments really need to be different from each other. Like, I need to feel the difference between playing a melee healer, like a Holy Paladin, or playing a summoner from Final Fantasy, or playing a hot class from WoW. They need to feel unique because I want the healers to have variety. If you're only going to give us one class that heals primarily, then it needs to have maximum variety. So they kind of have to do that. They really have to, because if they don't, being a tank and being a healer in Ashes is probably not going to be very sexy. Because you're not going to have a lot of variety compared to the other classes that can probably DPS in many different ways or support in different ways and blah blah blah, and the tanks and the healers are kind of stuck with whatever toolkit they have. And that I definitely would feel pretty bad for those guys, and it would be bad for the game because we need our tanks and our healers, and so we want them to be sexy. We want people to want to play them.
That's fair.
I'm pretty much in agreement. Uh-oh. Are you chuckling about?
No, go ahead.
Viluki out there trying to play dodgeball.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I was kind of worried about the one tank, one healer thing, because that's really what it boils down to when you're looking at ratios, right? You have one tank, one healer, 2 support, and 4 DPS. So that's really what we're looking at, and that doesn't sound like it feels very good. So having those extra options to be able to adjust how you can play that specific role is what's really going to make the tanks and healers, and honestly even the supports, feel like they have a choice in what they're doing. So as long as they do develop something where they stand out and they're unique, and I can actually... And here's my biggest gripe with some statements that have been put out before, is that tank is going to be the super powered, super prime tank, and everyone else is like second class citizens. And if you're a tank something else, sure, you could, with a question mark, tank some stuff, but you're not going to be very effective at all, which makes sense. Like, you can absolutely just be an off tank, or a, hey, you know, I'm just trying to survive longer while I support everyone. But that flavor variety of 8 different tanks is what's really going to make or break it. And I really hope that the tank mage, let's say, is just as viable and just as strong as a tank, just in a different way.
Yeah, I agree. Mitigation tanks. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Like in other games, mitigation tanks are historically like one of the harder tank specs to play, because you actually have to press your buttons at exactly the right time, because your entire build is based around that, is not having a ton of armor or a ton of health. It's really evading or actively blocking the thing that's coming at you. And it's like, I would like there to be an option for that for the tanks, and I would also like it to be the most viable spec for pushing some of the harder dungeons and stuff, you know, because maybe it's a mitigation based tank that does really good damage, right? And so a really, really solid tank could do both if they're good enough.
I was gonna say that I feel like this is also where Intrepid is trying to, 8 classes, 8 party members, they're trying to find a spot for everybody. You're gonna have your support plus your healing, so with the Bard, and then you're gonna have Summoner, who's probably helping out somewhere, because Summoner also has the ability to help with healing to a limited degree. But I'm excited to see how the Cleric Augment works for people, because I do know that there's going to be things like, let's just use Summoner as an example because it's on the brain at the moment. If you're able to summon a pet to help with healing a little bit of HOTS over time, kind of like the Scholar in Final Fantasy XIV, I could see something like that. So I think that is set up well for that, but I'm not going... I don't completely agree or foresee that every group of 8 is going to have one of each, you know?
Oh, so. Definitely not. That's not how groups organically come together.
Yeah. Right.
That's not how servers are formed.
No. So I could definitely see them pairing up with like 2 tanks, 2 heals, and then the rest are damaged. Yeah, exactly, Basil. Same brain. But I kind of want to backtrack to what was said in chat. It was a little bit of a thread I was trying to follow. And it was going back to, you know, the playing for a ranger with the bow and it being like the most optimal choice. And, you know, they started talking about how, you know, non-competitive players, for them, being optimal isn't really all that important. And, you know, Vladis brought up that if you are a competitive player, you're probably going to a website that tells you how to build, aka a meta, you know? Yep. And I think you're going to see the people that look for what people are telling them is the meta. And you're going to see people probably playing around with the secondary and saying, oh yeah, you think that's the meta? Watch this. Let me cook, you know?
Yeah, I
And-
think the like historically in MMOs, way back in the early days, there's this like, rose tinted glasses over the fact that, oh, it used to matter what you chose to play and no one knew the answers to everything. And you really
Right.
had to like actually learn about what you were doing in order to play optimally. I think those days are pretty much gone forever.
Right.
They're not coming back. Because not only have we conditioned ourselves to go to websites like Icy Veins or Snow Crows for Guild Wars 2 in order to play optimally, but it's also just so readily available now that even someone who maybe isn't intent on playing optimally, they're still going to stumble on those sites just to get something viable to make the game a little bit easier or more convenient to play. So I think that everyone just is going to end up looking for third-party sources, no matter what Steven does and how much he wants to limit add-ons and APIs and stuff like that. It's just most people just don't want to put in the effort of designing their builds, and that is a play style in and of itself. And I think the people who do actually theory craft these highly competitive builds in MMOs are a very niche and very valuable crowd of people, and they love doing that. And they're also on the cutting, bleeding edge of succeeding at content too, because they're the first ones to discover the metas and find out what really works, and that usually means that they're on the bleeding edge of completing that content above other people. So
The fun part is trying to figure out and try to think to yourself on how long they've been sitting on that info before they released it to everyone else.
Exactly.
Deal the secret for the first couple weeks, see if we can
they
get
got
it
their
down.
money's
and then
worth before they
Before they
sold out.
shared it. Yeah.
But Ratsu asked, what should a rogue's role be in an 8-man group ideally? And since we're talking about classes, I figured that'd be a decent time to drop that in. Personally, I envision rogue as being someone who's opportunistic, right? They're sneaky, they take advantage of weaknesses and whatnot. How neat would it be if they capitalized on status effects and whatnot that other players can put up? Maybe they will have their own, but they can't keep 100% uptime on them. But if other people can keep uptime and they can choose from their kit of which abilities of their own to hit, to take advantage of another status effect that someone else just put on there, I think that would be really neat, really cool idea. But yeah, other than that, it's probably going to be your typical skulk in the shadows, do some backstab stuff, always stay behind the bosses, single target damage, nuker, not very good in AoE, but also because they're trying to build in utility stuff, definitely finding sneaky little passageways, and potentially, the only ones who can lockpick actual doors instead of just those silly little boxes you find in WoW.
Yeah.
In group sites, I want rogues to be like the tank's best friend in groups. Like that's
I
how
can
I see the
imagine that.
rogue.
Like
So-
the
because-
rogue kind of like CCs them.
Yeah, tanks love that. Like they love having someone who's capable of marking, CCing, or just in any way controlling targets in the group, because a tank only has so much available in their toolkit. And rogues usually complement that really well in other MMOs I've played. So yeah, I think their job really is to set the tank up for success. And the nice thing about setting up the tank for success as a rogue is if the tank is able to control the mobs and position them properly, your damage tends to go up, rogues. So help out your tanks in positioning mobs and setting them up for high DPS.
Have you played Final Fantasy 14?
Oh man. So I have tried to get into Final Fantasy 14. I did the story up until the most recent expansion, which I forget what it's called, the Shadow something. So yes, I have played it.
Okay. Did you play Bard?
I did not actually. I played a samurai because I have a very big gripe with Final Fantasy, and that gripe was the pacing of the combat. It has a very long GCD, and I heard that samurai was the class where it would bother me the least, and so that's what I went with, because I was just trying to get through the story.
That's fair.
And get to the end game without quitting again because the combat was frustrating me. So yes, I should have played
Everett,
the
thank
Bard
you.
for sure, but I went with the Samurai because of the GCD.
Okay. Well, my question to you then is, I'm assuming you're familiar with Bard in Final Fantasy XIV, who are able to play instruments or do other things outside of combat in Final Fantasy XIV. So, would you like to see that in Ashes?
Of course, like in Lord of the Rings Online, the minstrel is the healer, and they are basically a bard. They play different types of instruments. And what was really cool about the minstrel was the kind of like in Baldur's Gate, where when you use your skills in combat, the sound that you make is based on the instrument that you're actually holding. And the minstrel was like that too in Lord of the Rings Online. So you could go in with a lute or a harp or drums or a flute. And so it was funny because we'd have like two minstrels in our raid group, and I always know which one was Tekro and which one was Pathogen, because he always uses a lute and he always uses drums. So you could hear the different healers in your raid, and who was casting abilities based on the sound of their weapons. So I'm also an enjoyer of being able to both watch players actually form bands and play live music as a form of player-driven content. And I also am an enjoyer of using macros in order to play music for people when we're waiting on a world boss to spawn, or maybe we're gathering up our raid and I just want to play some music for people.
Some background for your raid guild, your guild meeting, I mean.
Yeah, exactly. So I have always sincerely enjoyed being able to play instruments in MMOs. But my worry with Ashes is that Steven doesn't seem to be a fan of macros, and the other games that I just mentioned, that was kind of the primary method of playing like full-on soundtracks or sheet music to things, is utilizing a macro as opposed to playing it manually, because I don't actually have any musical prowess. I cheat using macros in order to play music. So I'm hoping that either they're going to have an exception for it, or they're actually going to put it into the game in some way, shape, or form, like integrate it somehow, that maybe we have people who can actually maybe compose something in game that they can share with other people and allow them to play that as well. I think that would be a great like player-driven content feature. I don't need it to be there day one of live, but I think it's one of those features that goes a really long way in any MMO, because it's all player oriented, right? It's going out and actively playing the music or making the music and just spreading the fun, spreading the love.
Okay.